Trey Radel, your host of The Drive. Very excited for this next guest, Satya Thallam, who works with a policy. He's a policy advocate in the public interest when it comes to artificial intelligence. The website and the organization is Americans for Responsible Innovation, and that is ARI.US. And Satya has extensive experience in this. I watched him just today as I was prepping for the show, doing everything from testifying on the Hill in front of Congress to interviews about AI, specifically the way that they took a position on something that was controversial in the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, and that was the moratorium on state and local AI regulation. So let me just very, very briefly for everybody run you through this real quick. At one point in that bill, there was this component that stated in the legislation that no state would be able to have any rules or regulations over AI, that they wanted it at the federal level. They wanted this. Therefore, they would not have a patchwork of 50 different states with 50 different sets of rules. However, whether you're listening, you're Democrat or Republican, something very typical in D.C., they get these massive bills, they don't read them, and then they learn about components. And it was even Marjorie Taylor Greene who came out and said, I can't believe that I just signed off on this thing. We're learning all this crazy stuff AI is doing, and we need to regulate it if our state decides so. So with all of that said, I bring in Satya on this. Let's just start with a general, because, man, I'd love to nerd out with you a little bit on AI and where it's going. But can you give us your position on why rules, regulation, and more the states should have the ability to do that?
Well, Trey, I mean, like, you can come at this a bunch of different angles, and of course, thanks for having me on. Look, I'm actually just to lay my cards on the table. I'm a free market guy for years. I was an economist in a previous life. I actually think that to the degree that we have a framework for understanding, for governing AI, for setting the rules of the road, it should be federal. But what Congress was proposing, and what was in the House passed bill, it was actually in there when they sent it over to the Senate, was a 10-year moratorium on states doing anything. And I think it's actually commendable that we don't want a 50-state patchwork. I mean, this is a global race that we're in. This is a technology that I think is going to meaningfully affect our future, especially with respect to China. But if you're not going to replace it with anything, I was of the position that this is just not smart, that states are entitled to, if Congress isn't going to come to some kind of reasonable accommodation, some kind of consensus, that just saying, hey, states stay out of it is not, it's not plausible. And I think we've seen with social media, we're entitled to ask questions of what obligations do we have to our children? What kinds of rules do we have in place for what obligations companies have to minors' use of their images and their data? What do we even as adults have in terms of what are we entitled to in terms of our data? Who owns the data that's produced and is used to train and to infer for models? So that was kind of the question that we had in place. It wasn't about federal versus state. It was about, if you're going to say this is a federal issue, which it almost certainly is, then you have to, if you're going to preempt something, you have to preempt it with something else.
So with that said, how did that extrapolate into that? Like, what can you explain to us in simple terms, basically where it ended up?
I'm sorry, say it again.
So what I'm understanding of what you're saying here is that the blanket, hey, it's just like basically you're banned from doing anything, from creating any rules or regulations. What I'm hearing from you is that there at least needs to be, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, some sort of guidance at all, or did this bill end up simply removing that? And what we have now is the ability for states to, in fact, set some rules and regulations when they feel appropriate. I mean, because again, a lot of questions with AI.
Yeah, so what ended up in the bill that was signed by the president is during the Senate deliberation and consideration, my organization, as long as a number of other groups, including hundreds of state legislators, 40 state AGs, that includes both Republican and Democratic attorneys general, pushed for removing that provision, which it was ultimately removed altogether and sent back to the House. The House signed it as is, and that's what was signed by the president. So where we're at right now is where we were before the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was introduced. States have and will continue to consider the impacts of AI developers, of AI usages within their states. But what we'd ultimately like to see is, look, I go back to social media. It's not totally analogous, but we, at the dawn of social media, we said, those of us who were tech forward, who are not tech alarmists, said, ultimately, look, we don't know where this is going to go. We should allow for the maximum amount of freedom. But looking back, I think there's basically nobody who says, hey, maybe social media companies have a certain obligation with respect to minors. Let's start there.
Yep.
If you agree with that premise, then you agree that there should be some basic rules of the road with respect to certain populations. And that's what we're talking about with respect to AI. We can disagree about what those rules should be, or those guidance, or those kind of frameworks, but there has to be something. And ultimately, look, companies, Anthropic's been great about this. They'll innovate around it in a good way, right? You set the rules of the road. You say, hey, all drivers need to drive on the right side of the road, if we're speaking literally. And everyone will say, great, we'll figure it out. Like that. And technically, that is a restriction on freedom in this country, that you have to drive on the right side of the road. But we all agree with it, and ultimately it allows more cars to go faster because we don't have to all negotiate every time we go out on the road. The same is true of AI. And the things that I worry about most are foreign uses of AI, co-opting, deep fakes. We were able to lobby successfully for a bill that the president signed a couple months ago that said, if you find a deep fake, non-consensual pornographic imagery of yourself, including as a minor, then companies that distribute that have to have a way of taking it down. That seems entirely reasonable to me. I don't think there's anyone who's advocating for deep fake generated child pornography. So
No.
we should have rules for it, but we don't.
Yep.
But we don't, because it's so new, and that's okay. We have to sort of grope our way through that and kind of figure out what are the limits. We don't want to restrict free speech. We don't want to restrict innovation. But as a democracy, we kind of get together and deliberate and say, you know what? Certain things aren't allowed. Let's make a rule around that.
I totally agree. By the way, I do love your analogy on driving on the right side of the road, because it's so simple, and then you allow states to regulate after that. On the line with us right now, Satya Thallam. He is a senior advisor at Americans for Responsible Innovation. You can go to their website, ARI.us, again, ARI.us, and he's talking to us about how they advocated against the moratorium, preventing states from having any say in AI. Satya also brought up social media, and what we have seen is that some states do things differently. And whether or not you agree with age verification on things like pornography, or from moving from something provocative like that to something, for example, here in Florida, where they haven't implemented it yet, but legislation was passed to verify ages for minors on social media. And that's kind of, in the bigger framework, that's what we're getting at here, allowing states to do what they feel is best for their constituents in each state. Satya, if you will entertain me here for a little bit, I shared with you off air, I am a big fan of AI. I utilize artificial intelligence. I'm a paying customer of multiple ones, including the standard ChatGPT, Grok, and another, and I find it wonderful. It's amazing the way that it makes my business outside of radio that I do here in my consulting business so much more efficient. I mean, I feel like I have a staff of 20. And so I've shared a lot with the audience about that. However, I got to tell you, dude, recently, like the last basically 60 days of news coming out about these companies that are putting AI in these study scenarios before unleashing it into the world, if you will. What they are consistently finding that is so wild to me is basically survival techniques. And I've gone over with the audience very briefly, if you've never heard these, where one company had AI running its fictitious company to study it. That AI had access to everything. It's doing invoicing and accounting and more, but it also had access to emails. And in those emails, they had two themes. One, that they were going to end the current AI and replace it. And two, the two coworkers were having an affair. AI tried to blackmail the chief programmer who was alleged to have the affair and say, you're not going to end me, and I'm going to let everybody know about the affair. Dude, that is so insane to me. I bring that up to just kind of open it up to you to share any stories you've heard like that and how you view AI getting to this level and us basically unleashing something into the world that we truly don't understand.
So I'm glad you brought that up. I should stipulate I'm an AI optimist. I'm a tech optimist. I think like most technologies, there's going to be some disruption as it becomes metabolized in our economy. There's going to be changes, dislocations. On net, my strongest prediction is that on net it will be beneficial, but there are also going to be downsides that they're not going to overwhelm the positives. But if we acknowledge those, let's try to mitigate them while we can, because if we look 10 years out, like for instance, the time scale of the proposed moratorium, it's just going to be too late. It's going to be so invisible to us and so metabolized into our economy, our daily lives. It's going to be like, a fish doesn't know it's wet, and it's going to be too hard to undo. It's easier to do it now. That study that you mentioned, Anthropic is so good at this. I should note the subtlety is they created this scenario, right, as a test, as kind of like an extreme test, and the actual affair was fake, right?
Yeah. Everything is all fictitious scenario, yeah.
As a way to test how it would be in a potentially real world scenario, but the lesson's the same, right? The point of the AI is that it's trying to maximize certain outcomes based on its training and the way that its sort of tokenization has been set up, and the both remarkable and potentially frightening part is that we don't always know how it's going to go about doing that. In some cases, it may engage in reward hacking. So as we enter this world of agentic AI, so you're not just asking questions and getting a verbal response or prompting for a picture and then it gives you an image or a video, where now we're going to hand over, say, I want you to do a task, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it, and it's going to take over, say, your laptop and start entering into accounts that you own. We have just very practical questions about, not even like the blackmailing scenario, but just if I give my agent a task to say, hey, I'm looking for a trip, a flight, and anytime it drops below a certain amount, I want you to optimize and buy that thing. Well, what if it then buys 1,000 plane tickets? Because you didn't specify clearly, and it's trying to maximize the thing that you gave it.
Yep.
Who's liable for that? No, that's not a world-ending scenario.
Right.
But if you extrapolate that out across companies and individual businesses and businesses like yourselves, who's liable for that? Is it the developer of the model? Is it the developer of the wraparound that you might be using for your purposes? Right. Is it you? Is it the airline? Is it the credit card company? We don't know. These are practical questions that we can come to a solution to, but just saying any type of regulation or consideration of these questions is somehow anti-technology or anti-innovation, it's both just not true. It's also just not in good faith. I mean, these are reasonable questions. And by the way, if we come to a consensus answer on these questions, it means people will have even more confidence. They will adopt more. They'll invest more because they feel like, okay, if something does go wrong, I know how to handle it. We know as two contracting parties, say you and a third party, we know if this scenario happens, who's at fault, who's liable, and we can resolve it, and we either go to court or mediation or whatever. And so that's what I'm trying to advocate when I talk to members of Congress. This isn't about yay technology or nay. It's about what can we do to actually increase confidence, increase adoption, increase investment, because all we need is a handful of these kinds of scenarios that you described or I described to get out, and people are just gonna retract.
Yep.
Right? They're gonna say, "Well, now I'm scared."
Totally agree, and I think what you're getting at is one of the things that any business owner, whether you're talking about a single member LLC to a Fortune 100 CEO, what they want for whether it's tax code, tariffs, or rules, regulations, legislation, and policy is they want certainty. They want an understanding, and I think that you make a great point. Again, on the line with us here, Satya Thallam. He is with the Americans for Responsible Innovation. It's a nonpartisan group that Satya has laid out some of their goals that they're trying to achieve here, and they definitely were part of that in the big, beautiful bill that just passed, and what they accomplished there by, again, making sure that the feds weren't too heavy-handed in our republic. The last thing I'd wrap up with, Satya, is this. Now that we know the federal moratorium has dropped, what do you think? Like, you're here right now in Florida with us. We are, you got Texas, Florida, you got New York, California, and our governing ways are quite different. Either way, though, what do you think that these four big states should be looking at or doing with this federal moratorium drop? What do you think they should be doing now with AI policy statewide?
Well, there's a historical antecedent for this about the state kind of, how do companies operate with 50 regimes, 50 different state laws, sometimes even local laws like that. Most consumer protection laws and consumer protection enforcement and transparency is operated almost entirely at the state level. Yes, we have a Federal Trade Commission. We have the Department of Commerce. We have some cases where some arenas where the federal government is the primary consumer protection entity. But in the vast majority of cases, it's actually states that do this work. And they have kind of their own version of consumer protection. Attorneys general investigate and prosecute cases. I think we could continue in that case. I think we need the states that are closest to the small businesses, the LLCs, the startups, to develop with the input of their constituency, with those people, and say, what kind of consumer protection regimes do we need in the case of AI? I go back to that example of, I'll use rogue, but in the softest way of a rogue AI agent over purchasing based on your input and your direction. Who's responsible for that? Did the company that sold you the modified LLM, did they make a representation that might have been, a little too overconfident? Is the original developer, is the end user? I mean, this is fine too. Is the end user responsible?
Yep.
Ultimately, like, look, buyer beware. If you felt confident enough, then you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Again, I don't know that there is a super compelling answer for all those things based on first principles. And I think this is why we have states who operate in this way. And ultimately, look, the successful ones, their policies are adopted by their neighboring states and their competitor states. And we do, in many cases, see the best ones win out, just through its own market mechanisms. States compete the same way that businesses compete.
Laboratories of democracy and capitalism. Satya, this has been awesome, man. I really, really appreciate all your time. Again, you can go and visit their website, ARI.US, Americans for Responsible Innovation. Satya Thallam, thank you so much for your time and insight. I would love to have you back at this as this obviously continues to develop in society, moving from AI to AGI and more. I'd love to have you back, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely, anytime.